Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dhalinyarada iyo aqoonyahanka ka soo qayb galay shirkan qaayaha leh ee ay SONSAF inoo samaysay aad iyo aad u idin salaamaya. waxaan salaamayaa SONSAF madaxdeeda soo qabqabsay shirkan muhiimka ah. markii hore runtii waxa la igu yiri ajaanib badan baa imanaya shirka ingiriisi ku soo diyaar gareen. marka waxaan jeclaan lahaa bal by show of hands inaan eego cidda aan ingiriisiga haddii aan ingiriisi ku hadda aan fahmayn bal gacanta ha taagan qofkaan ingiriisiga fahmayn. waxaan u malaynayaa markaa raalli waa laga yahay inaan khudbadayda ingiriisi ku jeediyo. Very good. First off, I just want to really thank the attendees and the delegates that attending this very, very important meeting on extractives on Somaliland. Many thanks to Somaliland Non-State Actors Forum, SONSAF, and its director, Mohammed Ahmed Mahmoud, and its officers for organizing this important forum. I think this forum is really a forum that was just basically, past due to be held to help understand, help the community, Somaliland citizens as well as people in the country have an accurate picture and accurate information given to them about the extractive sector of Somaliland, which has yet to be called extractive because we haven't extracted anything. We're basically hoping to extract something. And we want to really basically first start my talk about the issue of oil, which is always a very touchy subject. We have, as the Minister of Interior mentioned, a lot of detractors and enemies to this effort of getting oil and gas explored and exploited in Somaliland. There is a lot of pressure and a lot of objection to this effort that Minister Warahante has touched on in Somali, so I'm not going to really elaborate on that. But what I would like to talk about is that its political status as an unrecognized de facto state, and due to the security concerns that oil companies have about operating in the Horn of Africa, it has been challenging for Somaliland to attract oil companies, except for a very few that have the risk tolerance for operating in such an environment and have experience in operating in similar challenging areas. You have to understand, not a lot of oil and gas companies are lining up and knocking our doors to come and operate in Somaliland. We've made a lot of effort to attract companies to come and work here. Therefore, due to the limited interest from international oil companies to come to Somaliland, the Somaliland government abandoned the bid round process for licensing blocks in favor of an open door policy. Some of you who are familiar with the oil and gas business know that when countries want to really basically award acreage, they typically conduct what you call a bid round. In other words, they basically have a bunch of companies coming in that are interested to bid on a block and say, we want to really get a contract with that block. Well, guess what? Nobody's really lining up for us. As a matter of fact, the previous government, or the previous minister before us, tried that effort and went that process of trying to get a bid round. And they spent a lot of effort in doing that, putting up, staging it, announcing it, spending a lot of media effort. And when the bid round opened, guess how many companies showed up to bid on this acreage? 0. Because of that, we basically opted to go and find ways to attract companies, that is not instead of the bid round process, because we didn't really embarrass ourselves to really have, stage this bid round process and then nobody shows up. Instead, what we try to do is to solicit companies that we think could be interested in working in Somaliland and attract them by using what you call an open door policy, to negotiate with them one-on-one. Once we find an interested company, we don't just tell them come in, because anybody can really call themselves an oil company. A couple of guys, put a paper together and call themselves, ABC Oil Company can be an oil company. So we have to really see if the company that they're really interested is company that has the qualification and wherewithal in terms of technical and financial capacity to do something. So we have a due diligence process for whoever we think we should really basically enter into a contract with. So once we find a qualified interested company, we qualify their technical and financial capacity to farm into existing interests or enter into a new production sharing agreement or PSA. That is your typical contract that countries enter into with oil companies. It's called production sharing agreement or PSA. We ask them to basically fill out an application, provide all their information, and submit it to the Ministry of Energy and Minerals. If they qualify, and not a lot of them did qualify, most of them really don't meet the requirement that we set up for a viable company to work with us, then we enter into negotiations with them and hammer out an agreement in ensuring that the government gets the best possible take in these agreements. We hire reputable international oil and gas lawyers to support the government in these negotiations. Oil and gas agreements are very complex, and you really need highly qualified oil and gas companies, attorneys, to support you in negotiating a deal with these oil companies. That's why we pay a tidy sum to the tune of $500 an hour. This is how much these lawyers cost to help us negotiate a viable deal with these oil companies. Once an agreement is reached with the oil company, we don't go ahead and sign it in a dark, smoke-filled room like some of the naysayers write in the papers. We send it to the full Council of Ministers to debate it, dissect it, and see if they can ratify that agreement for the entire government, with the President chairing that meeting. If that is approved by the Council of Ministers and it's ratified by the Council, that is when we, as a ministry, execute the agreement and sign it with the company. In line with our Constitution, Somaliland uses an existing Petroleum Act. Some of the misinformation that's just being put out there says these guys are basically operating without any law, without any petroleum code. They're basically just kind of doing this on the fly. Well, we're not. There is an existing Petroleum Act in place that we inherited from the previous Somalia government that we were part of, until we have our own Petroleum Act, that is basically particular to us, which we will discuss today. The petroleum, regulation package that we're working on, we will talk about it today as well. This existing petroleum law vests the approval of such petroleum agreements to the executive branch of our government. But the legislator has the prerogative to summon myself as the Minister of Energy anytime and as often as they do to answer any questions posed by them on any PSA agreement that is entered into by the executive branch. The Ministry of Energy and Minerals has been working for over a year in developing a new upstream petroleum regulatory framework. We're still working under the old petroleum code, as I said, that we inherited from the previous government. We don't want to really use that law anymore. It's archaic, it's out of date, it doesn't belong to us. So we have basically started to marshal efforts to develop a modern fourth generation petroleum regulatory framework, which we have been working on for over a year, with the help of world-class Norwegian law firm. Why did we choose the Norwegians? Well, as you all know, the Norwegians basically are the gold standard in terms of managing natural resources. And they have the best attorneys in the sector in terms of helping countries develop effective regulatory framework for the extractive sector, particularly the oil and gas. The development and drafting of this new legal framework was presented in a workshop such as this one to Somaliland government key stakeholders this past June. The attorneys then finalized the package incorporating the workshop input in August. The new petroleum regulatory package has been under translation by a Somaliland law firm called Haqdan, which we'll have a speech here today and give you an outline about this regulatory framework for oil and gas, as well as mining, and has been under review by the government Solicitor General, who is with us today, to ensure it does not conflict with existing Somaliland laws. Once the translation and review is completed, the bill will be sent to the full Council of Ministers for debate, then will be forwarded to the legislator to make it into law. The package consists of a policy, government policy towards petroleum, an upstream petroleum bill, or it's going to be an act when it comes into law, and a petroleum revenue bill. I particularly asked for that last bill, or last act, which is called Petroleum Revenue Act. We haven't really gotten any oil out of the ground yet, but what we wanted to have is to have laws in place well before we get anything out of the ground that basically delineates who is going to have what. For example, we start producing oil, and God willing, we found oil, and we're going to have a food fight. How much is going to belong to the community? How much is going to belong to Clan X? How much is going to belong to the government? How much is going to belong to where the government basically have the full authority to, basically do whatever it wants with that revenue? No. We want to have a law that will mandate how that revenue is going to be used by the people of Somaliland. It's going to be the law of the land. And that will be passed by the parliament. Using an open-door policy to attract willing companies to work here versus the bid round has proved more successful for us, and we are able to farm in several companies into existing licenses that we inherited from the previous government, and we were also able to sign 2 new PSAs with 2 new oil companies. Companies that farmed into an existing licenses include Jaka Resources, Guinea, Rag Gas, Sterling, and Petrogas. I have heard some statements in the media that we entered into not less than 200 new contracts during our tenure. That statement is off by 2 zeros. We only entered, the only new PSA that this government has signed during its 4.5 years tenure are only 2. One with DNO and one with a company called Amsan. That's it. But I've just listened to this gentleman one time saying on TV that we have signed 200 new contracts under a smoke-filled dark room, Companies that farm into existing PSAs, such as Guinea, Rag Gas, others did not have to pay any signing bonuses. That is the thing that I really also need to demystify about all this money that we have basically taken from the oil companies and we don't know where it went. First off, these companies that really come into an existing agreement, like those that I mentioned, they don't have to pay anything because they're just basically acquiring somebody else's interest. And the way they're going to just basically acquire that interest does not reflect any money that's coming to the government. It's called a farm-in. They're basically taking off kalisaanigiisii qaadanayaan. Shirkad meesha joogtay ee saamigeedii la wareegayaan. Marka wax lacag oo dawladda uga imanaysaa ma jirto. The shirkaddan this Guinea company that everybody's talked about, how much money do they pay the government? 0. Rag Gas, they haven't paid anything either because they farmed into an existing contract with Ophir. Guinea farmed into an existing contract with Asante and Prime Resources, and basically take over their interests, and they're going to be the operator, basically. And that is basically standard industry practice. When a company farms into an existing interest or existing PSA, they don't have to pay anything to the government. So the only two companies that paid signature bonuses to the government are as follows. Ophir Energy, which we awarded them half a block called SL9 West. DNO, which we awarded a block called Block 18. And Ansan, which we awarded 2.5 blocks, a portion of SL7, SL14, and SL19. The signature bonuses pertaining to awarding the above noted blocks were paid to the Somaliland government. In order to ensure transparency and proper accountability, all funds paid by the oil companies to meet their obligations are sent directly to the Central Bank of Somaliland, who verifies and clears the funds and ensures that they are deposited in proper government treasury accounts. The Ministry of Energy and Minerals have made it a practice to make the receipt of these funds public, and the Ministry of Finance has attested to their receipt. I'm sure some of you have seen us basically parading checks in front of national television and saying, this is how much money we got from company X. So, and this money doesn't really come to the minister here, yours truly. It goes to directly to the central bank governor, who in turn then clears the funds and puts it in the Ministry of Finance's account. We only are basically notified when the signature bonuses are paid. That's how we really know about it. We want to just touch on the revenue that we generated as a ministry during the 4.5 years that we were basically in charge of this ministry. We have basically asked the Ministry of Finance to give us a sense of the record of the ministry before us during the past 8 years before we came into the picture. And the information that we have gotten from them was that the 8 years before this before this existing government, the revenue generated during those past 8 years by the Ministry of Energy and Minerals was $185,000. In comparison, we've been in charge for 4.5 years. We have 4.5 years tenure, and we have generated to the Treasury $4.5 million. The previous government signed as much or even more PSAs and mineral permits than we did. Yet we generated 24 times as much revenue for the Treasury than they did. If there has been some corruption in our dealings with the oil and mining companies, as some unscrupulous tabloid local media outlet with ulterior motives alleged at one time, the ministry's record speaks for itself. Just want to really touch on demystifying the much misunderstood production sharing contract. I have seen people write articles about how we're getting fleeced by the oil companies, how they're really getting the lion's share of the production, and how basically we sold this country's resources to foreign companies. And production sharing contracts are basically something that is unique to the oil and gas industry. It's very, it's very unique and very complicated. And I have seen really a lot of articles written about this is how much the government is going to have. This is company X is going to be having this and this and that. And none of it is basically has no basic reality. So I just want to really thought, since we're talking about the extractive sector, to demystify how production sharing contracts work. Non-renewable natural resources are an important issue for every country. Countries strive to get the most value for these resources and to exchange the right to develop them for meaningful contributions for the nation and its people. We have done the same here. Not everyone will be familiar with the structure of a typical profit-sharing contract or PSC. That is the contract that are signed between countries and oil companies. وهشيسada sharaa'icka petroolka ay la galaan PSCs baana ku magacaabeen magaca shortka la yiraahdo PSCs. It's an agreement unique and common to the hydrocarbon industry. In a PSC, the investor, which is the oil company, like they call them IOCs or international oil companies in Somaliland, such as Genel, DNO, Raggas, and Ansan, funds all the costs. They fund all the costs and take all the risks that it will to find hydrocarbons in a commercial quantities. All the money that's going to be basically spent on this exploration effort is going to be fully paid by the oil companies. Typically, the chances of making a commercial discovery are 5 to 10%. We were basically talking that we have oil galore, we can find oil 100%. That is not the case. The world batting average in finding oil versus a dry hole is 5 to 10%. In other words, the chances of success is that much. And all of that risk is being taken by the oil companies. So there is a significant risk of investing a lot of money and coming away with nothing. In Somaliland, it's difficult to estimate the chances of success because we are just developing a modern hydrocarbon industry and there is no scientific data to help us predict the existence and location of commercial quantities of hydrocarbons. This means that our commercial terms must be more attractive because nobody really knows if we have anything. Then in the countries that have significant proving hydrocarbon reserves, like Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, we cannot really have the same type of contracts with oil companies because we don't compare. We are called greenfields. Basically, we know nothing. They have no information. I mean, they suspect there is oil here, but that is really not 100% certain that there is commercial quantities of oil here. There are other risks that influence the commercial terms. There are other risks that influence the commercial terms that we can negotiate investors, including political and legal risks. And that is something unique to Somaliland because we're not a recognized country. So it's really difficult for a company to come here and sign with a country that's just a de facto state because there is a legal risk to that contract. The PSC is typically split into an exploration period and a longer contingent development period. If the investor does not make a commercial discovery during the exploration period, the PSC or the contract will terminate. The investor will lose all the rights, including any right to recover its sunk costs, and the government will be free to enter into a new production sharing contract. The development period allows the discovery to be developed and provides an opportunity for the investment cost to be recovered. That is, they find oil, they recoup their cost. If they don't find anything, they just walk away. Once there's an oil found, the oil basically is split between cost oil and profit oil. The cost oil basically is used to recoup the investment of the oil company. The cost oil, the profit oil, is basically split between the country and the oil company. Under full economic analysis, you will see that the investor does not make any profit until it recovers all its sunk costs, which takes years of consistent production. The government gets both the royalty share and its profit share oil regardless of the profitability. Right off the bat, the government started making money. But the oil company basically takes a long time to turn a profit because they have to really recover all their sunk costs. Typically, on a production sharing contract, there is the following things that the government takes out of that production. First off is the the signature bonus that they take off the top when they sign the agreement. The second thing that they take is all bonuses when the production reaches a certain targets. Then they will have a service rent. Then they get royalty. Then they have training and nation building programs from the oil company. The investor commits to conduct minimum amount of work in the exploration period. The government gets the royalty share, and the government gets a large share of the profit for the most part. The way the contract is structured, as production climbs and goes bigger and bigger, the government take becomes bigger and bigger. I just want to really basically touch quickly on the resource curse issue, or the Dutch disease that were basically talked about here a while ago. The extractive industry critics are quick to point out that oil resources exploitation often result in environmental disasters, and few insiders line up their pockets on the riches gained from oil production. Although there has been cases of gross revenue mismanagement, cases of gross resource mismanagement, that is not necessarily the rule but the exception. We have shining examples such as Norway, which has managed its resources in a fiscally and environmentally responsible way. They have now accumulated $900 billion of sovereign wealth fund, which is much larger than that of Abu Dhabi for their future generations. African countries such as Ghana are getting better in managing their resources as well and following the Norwegian example. I was recently in DRC, a post-conflict country of immense natural resources who has been looted in the past by everyone. But with improved peace and stability are now getting better handle in managing their resources and have even passed the EITI initiative, or the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. Believe it or not, DRC passed it now. They're basically getting better at getting a handle on their resources. By the way, we're also aspiring to one day get clearance with the passage of a new regulatory framework that we have talked about and improved best practices. On the other hand, there is the example of the past misdeeds of the oil industry, such as what happened in the Niger Delta. Oil companies can no longer afford to work with governments with corruptive practices or commit environmental disasters. It is bad for the bottom line. It can bankrupt them because of the potential huge liabilities that can result from such offenses. For example, BP almost got bankrupt because of the US Gulf Coast incident. We include in our production sharing contracts anti-bribery clauses in all our new contracts. Full terms that basically ensures the companies that they have to really abide by anti-bribery practices. Before we get anything off the ground, we want to emulate the successes of countries that manage their resources well and avoid the mistakes that others have made in exploiting their resources. That is why we hired a Norwegian law firm to draft our petroleum legal framework to set out a sound foundation to our resource management practices. We want to chart the path of implementing best practices. Most often than not, countries that exploited their natural resources have seen their economies grow. It's not all curse, believe it or not. People basically prosper when they get their resources exploited. New modern infrastructure are built, and poverty is alleviated. We want to chart the path of prudent management of our natural resources to bring about a positive impact on the lives of our people and our country. We don't feel that oil exploitation will bring about conflict in the region, but believe the opposite. It will bring about more stability to Somaliland by growing the economy and alleviating poverty. Very quickly on the mineral exploration side of the business. We have just basically talked about oil. Somaliland is part of the Mozambique Belt, which is rich in both base and precious metals. It is also part of the Nubian Shield, which is prospective for gold. The mineral potential of Somaliland is underexplored. It is what the extractive industry calls green fields, meaning unexplored, nothing is proven. Attracting mining companies to invest in green fields is tough in the best of times. In recent years, the world commodity prices were declining or remained flat. I attended international mining conferences such as the African Mining Indaba, Africa Down Under in Australia, to woo mining companies to come to Somaliland. We have had limited success so far because of the political and legal risks envisioned by international mining companies in investing in an unrecognized country that is located in a tough neighborhood. We have issued prospective licenses to several small or startup companies who have been actively exploring. One licensee has proven a resource that can be commercially exploited, and some others are hopeful to do so. Like we did with the petroleum sector, we have developed a new mining code as well to replace the old one that we inherited from the Siad Barre regime, which went through the same process as the new Petroleum Legal Framework package. It will also be soon sent to the Council of Ministers, and from there to the legislator to have a new mining code for Somaliland as well. I want to really touch one last time on the issue of environment, which has been really basically talked about, this very, very key issue for extractives. I was born in the countryside, by the way, in the Sara region of Somaliland, to a nomadic family. I'm talking about myself. I'm not an American, as some of you might think. I'm a country boy at heart and care very much for our indigenous way of life. On the other hand, being a petroleum engineer who obtained his education and professional training in the States, a country that has a strict environmental regulation, I am keenly cognizant of the need to protect our country's natural environment from the effects of resource extraction. Having lived in California for nearly 25 years, a state known for its beautiful beaches and care for the environment, I am a tree hugger, what they call a tree hugger. Myself, and no environmental mismanagement will happen under my watch in this country. My motto in exploiting our natural resources to improve the economy is, first, do no harm to the environment. We are by and large nomadic folks that live off the land through what it provides in the way of pasture for our livestock that our economy depends on, so we have to protect it. On both petroleum as well as mining agreements, we have implemented strict best practices in protecting the environment from extractive operations' potential adverse effects. We require all extractive activities to be preceded by a thorough environmental impact assessment studies performed by reputable international companies, such as the case on all the PSCs that we have signed with the oil companies and the mining agreement as well. Once the environmental impact assessment is done, it provides best practices approach to the exploration and the exploitation process and provides clear guidelines for the operators to follow to mitigate any adverse environmental impacts that can result from these operations. We work closely with our Ministry of Environment and Rural Development in ensuring, jointly with the Ministry of Energy and Minerals, proper environmental oversight when operations begin. This ministry has achieved in 4.5 years what was not achieved in the 19 years prior since the Somaliland gained its independence. We have put Somaliland on the map as an extractive industry destination. We have also taken Somaliland's name to international oil and gas and mining arenas that it has never been to before. Despite our lack of recognition, we were able to attract 4 international oil companies, some of which are publicly traded, to operate in Somaliland. The seismic exploration work is now pending the establishment of an OPU to provide the security to these operations. And that is what the Minister of the Interior have talked about today to elaborate and clarify. We are well on our way to begin our first commercial mining operations in Somaliland's history. That is going to happen in early 2015. We're going to start extracting minerals and shipping it through Berbera. We will, for the first time, won't no longer be shipping live animals. Hopefully we'll start shipping minerals from Somaliland. And finally, we have set the stage for Somaliland to become an oil discovery, to make an oil discovery in the coming few years. Thank you very much.
aad buu mahadsanyahay kole waqtigiina uu isku rayaa waxaan filayaa inaad wada fahanteen waxba uma baahnaa filayaa inaynu turjumno breakii baynu geli doonaa dabeedna su'aalaha inta soo gala break markaan soo noqono baynu su'aalihiina discussion ka geli doonaa oo mahadsantahay